Now, we're told that these protests in Cuba are because of COVID and the lack of vaccines. I'm going to go with yes and. It's not that that doesn't have anything to do with it. I'm sure there's a kernel of truth to that. But it's really about a lifetime of misery and oppression from the communists in Cuba. People who are waving American flags are not waving them because there's no vaccines. That doesn't make any sense. What's the connection there? They're waving American flags because it's just like the Hong Kong protests on the bottom right and protests in Iran on the top right there. That's what you wave when you want freedom. You wave the American flag. And it's the same thing in Cuba, people waving the American flag. And we have people in America waving the communist flag. Weird, huh? Wanting America to be a communist country. They would go to Cuba, you know. But they're just not doing communism the right way over there. It's not real communism. It's been real communism. It's just not anymore. And that's why I felt, oh, darn it. You know, I would go and live in this communist utopia over there, but they're just not doing it the right way. If only they were. If only they were, then Cuba would be the utopia that I talked about in my high school or in my college seminar. It would be a utopia, and they wouldn't have people swimming in shark-infested waters to get to America. Alas, this is the acting assistant secretary of the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Western Hemisphere. It's like Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs or something like this. This woman's like one step higher in the bureaucracy than me. Julie Chung. Peaceful protests are growing in Cuba as the Cuban people exercise their rightful right to peaceful assembly, which they don't have, by the way, to express concern about rising COVID cases and deaths and medicine shortages. We commend the numerous efforts of the Cuban people mobilizing donations to help neighbors in need. Yes, as they're getting shot in the head by the Cuban government. It's not about COVID. Maybe that's part of it, but that's not the root of it. Someone, in response to that, posted a picture of people tearing down the Berlin Wall and wrote, yes, I'll never forget those protests against the German measles. It's not what this is about, lady. Now, this whole thing this talking point from the left puts them in a bit of a sticky position because we've always heard from the left for a long time that Cuba has amazing socialized healthcare. It is fantastic. It is the best healthcare in the world because they truly care about their people, unlike here in America. Even though Castro himself was flown to a hospital in Spain when he was dying, you would think that would have put an end to that talking point. But either the healthcare system in Cuba is amazing, or the healthcare system in Cuba is so bad, it's causing all this social unrest. Which is it? It wasn't long ago. Nicholas Kristof in 2019 in the New York Times, he said, Cuba has the Medicare for all that many Americans dream about. You know, Michael Moore and Bernie, they've called it the best healthcare system in the world. But of course, it's terrible. It's always been terrible. This is everything over there is. So how do they get around that? How do they get around that hypocrisy or inconsistency or blaring lie that they have a great healthcare system? How do they get around that? Well, it's easy. It's America's fault. Because everything is America's fault. It would be the best healthcare system in the world. That's the thing. So they've been saying it is. It is the best healthcare system. Well, now it's proven that it's clearly not. And then they say, well, it would be if it weren't for the great Satan. This is CBS Morning News yesterday doing their best communist propaganda.
The Trump administration passed many more regulations, many more sanctions against it, which basically has cut off all income coming into Cuba.
Portia Siegelbaum is a CBS News producer based in Cuba.
I think the Biden administration, he at least said at the beginning he was going to review this policy and make changes, but nothing has happened.
Yes. It's always America's fault. You want to know the truth of that? Cuba can trade with any other country in the world. We have not blocked them off from the world. They can trade with anyone. Yesterday, I looked at their biggest trading partners. Their biggest importing partners are Spain, Russia, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, France, Poland, China, Brazil, Argentina, Canada, Mexico. I can go on and on. They can trade with every country in the world. I just saw before we went on the air a ration chart of what you're allowed to have in Cuba. In Cuba, you're allowed 5 eggs a month. Is that America's fault? Of course not. There's no way that a trade embargo with America has crippled their country to the point where it is today. Instead, the misery that the people of Cuba have felt for decades now might, just might, have something to do with that whole communism thing. Maybe. But here's where it gets interesting. I've been musing about this and thinking a lot about this last day. China especially, but China and Russia, they both have a vested interest in making sure that their little communist colony doesn't fail. So the question is, who has a greater interest? Who wants it more? Who wants it more? The communists who are in power in Cuba and the Chinese, or the Americans with this island right off our coast? Who wants it more? Do the communists want communism there more, or do we want freedom there more? That's the question. Who wants it more? And I would argue, unfortunately, that the communists have more fight in them right now than we do. They believe in what they believe in more than we do.
Wow, that was deep and insightful. I want more of that. Like,
Subscribe. Get more.